You ever notice the way a room shifts when you walk in? How the air gets thick, like everyone suddenly remembered they're mortal, and you are the unpredictable variable in their little equation. They don't know if it's your confidence, your quiet, your fire, but something in you hits them so hard their whole personality buffer starts lagging. That's what happens when your presence isn't just seen. It's felt, deep, electric, undeniable. And the best part,
You're not even trying.
you just exist and the world stutters. Because some people glow but you. You walk in with an aura that makes even the loudest souls go silent, trying to figure out if they should be inspired by you or terrified of how high you're about to climb. You ever walk into a place and feel the temperature drop, not because it's cold, but because everyone else suddenly is. That quiet, jittery kind of cold, the kind people feel when their brains start running a little too fast, trying to make sense of the fact that someone just entered the room and rearranged the atmosphere without lifting a single finger. That strange, electric tension, that's what your presence does. It slips through the cracks of people's confidence, crawls under their skin, and presses a little reminder. Something powerful just stepped in. Most people think influence comes from talking, shouting, demanding attention. But yours is the opposite. It's the silence before a storm, the pause in a heartbeat, the whisper in someone's mind telling them to straighten up, watch their tone, adjust their posture. You don't have to announce yourself. You don't have to step on a table or wave your arms around. You just cross the threshold and the air. Yes, the air itself decides to behave differently. And it's funny, isn't it? Because you're not doing anything unusual. You're not glowing, floating, or throwing lightning bolts. You might just be standing there, maybe scrolling your phone, maybe adjusting your sleeves. But somehow the entire room feels like they've been caught doing something they shouldn't. They look at you like you're a walking truth serum, a reminder of everything they've been avoiding in themselves. The insecure ones get quieter. The competitive ones get twitchy. The jealous ones start analyzing every detail about you, trying to figure out what it is you have that they don't. They'll convince themselves you're trying to intimidate them, that you're being mysterious on purpose, that you're scheming. But the truth is almost disappointing for them. You're just existing, just standing there, just breathing. Yet somehow your ordinary cuts sharper than their loudest attempts at being noticed. It bothers them because you expose how fragile their confidence really is. You don't expose it by speaking, by mocking, by judging. No, it's your presence alone that pulls the mask right off their face. Some people crumble under that kind of presence. Some cling to fake smiles, pretending they aren't bothered. Some straighten their backs, as if a straight spine could protect them from whatever it is they feel radiating off you. They don't know if it's confidence, calm, danger, ambition, or all of it wrapped into one. They just know they're responding to something deep. It's instinct. Because you have that kind of aura. The kind that doesn't ask for respect, it extracts it. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that people feel before they can understand. They see you and suddenly they're sitting up straighter, thinking sharper, watching their words, adjusting their energy. They don't realize they've handed you the psychological spotlight without you ever stepping onto the stage. And the funniest part is that you're not even trying to play a role. You're not putting on a show. You're not reciting a script. You walk in with the weight of someone who knows themselves, and people react as if gravity just changed. You're the disruption they didn't prepare for, the variable their minds weren't built to calculate, the presence that shakes something in them awake or shakes something in them loose. You step into a room, and suddenly the atmosphere has questions. You step into a room, and suddenly people forget how to act natural. You step into a room, and suddenly the world remembers you're not just entering a space. You're altering it. There's something peculiar that happens when people sense potential, real potential, not the decorative kind they like to post about online. I'm talking about the kind that carries weight, the kind that has direction, discipline, and danger intertwined within it. When people encounter that, they often don't applaud. They retreat, they tighten up, their eyes shift, their posture stiffens just a little, because potential implies responsibility, And responsibility implies competence, and competence, true competence, forces everyone around it to confront their own shortcomings. You see, people aren't intimidated by you because you're loud or domineering or trying to assert yourself. They're intimidated because you represent something they know deep down they could be, but aren't. Potential reveals inadequacy. It shines a quiet but unmistakable light on the gap between who they are and who they could be if they were willing to confront the chaos within themselves. When you walk in with that kind of aura, that inner alignment, it naturally unsettles them. This reaction is actually very ancient. Human beings have always been sensitive to hierarchy, not the oppressive kind, but the natural kind that emerges when someone demonstrates capability, when someone embodies order in their posture, clarity in their gaze, and intentionality in their actions. It sends a signal, not a flashy one, not a boastful one, a biological one. People become aware, almost immediately, that they're in the presence of someone who has oriented themselves toward a meaningful aim, someone who has confronted their own shadow, at least partially, and integrated enough of it to walk with steadiness. And that steadiness is threatening, not because it harms anyone, but because it silently exposes the instability in others. Many people spend their lives avoiding self-confrontation. They distract themselves with noise, entertainment, excuses, narratives that protect them from the realization that they are not living up to their own potential. Then you show up, someone who hasn't necessarily reached the mountaintop, but is certainly climbing. Someone who holds themselves to a standard, someone who acts with intention instead of drifting on autopilot. And when they see that, it creates an uncomfortable contrast. They start evaluating themselves, often subconsciously. Why don't I carry myself that way? What am I avoiding? Why do I feel so uneasy right now? These are difficult questions, and difficult questions often produce defensive reactions. So they freeze up, they grow quiet, they avoid eye contact, they become overly polite or oddly dismissive. They're not reacting to you as a person. They're reacting to the mirror your presence holds up to them. Your potential forces them to encounter the parts of themselves they've kept in the dark, the laziness they've justified, the goals they've postponed, the habits they've neglected, the courage they haven't cultivated. And rather than face that directly, many people simply withdraw. They protect the fragile structure of their identity by distancing themselves from anything that challenges it. But here's the deeper truth. The fact that you intimidate people doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It often means you're doing something right. It means you're developing yourself, building strength, psychological, emotional, intellectual, and people respond to strength, whether they admit it or not. Strength demands respect. It provokes reflection. It stirs something ancient and necessary in the human psyche. Your potential, then, is not merely a trait, it's a force. A force that compels others to reassess their own trajectory. A force that disrupts complacency. A force that signals that you are moving towards something higher, something ordered, something meaningful. And in a world where many people have lost themselves in chaos, someone who carries direction becomes a living reminder of what is possible and what is required to reach it. Authority, real authority, is not something you announce. It's not something you paste onto yourself with flashy language or artificial displays of dominance. It's something that emerges organically when you've put yourself through the necessary internal restructuring. When you've disciplined your impulses, clarified your values, confronted your fears, and taken responsibility for the direction of your life. That kind of internal order radiates outward, and people pick up on it long before you ever open your mouth. Human beings are unbelievably sensitive to posture, tone, expression, and orientation. We can detect confidence, or the lack of it, in fractions of a second. And when you carry yourself with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from genuine self-mastery, people feel it. They might not be able to articulate it, but they respond to it. They adjust their behavior around you. They become more careful with their words. They sense that you're someone who sees more than you let on, someone who isn't easily deceived, someone who won't be pushed into falsehoods or chaos just to make others comfortable. Your aura carries silent authority because you've earned it internally. You've wrestled with your weaknesses, at least enough to know they exist. You've learned to regulate your nervous system, to stand upright in the face of discomfort, to speak truthfully even when it's inconvenient. Those actions shape your presence. They build a psychological structure around you that others intuitively recognize. People understand, often subconsciously, that you're not a person they can manipulate with small emotional tactics or social games. You don't bend just because someone wants you to. You're anchored. You're oriented toward something higher, and that orientation matters. When someone is aligned with a purpose that transcends momentary impulses, they give off a different sort of energy. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's stable, it's focused. It's the presence of someone who doesn't feel the need to prove themselves, because they've already proven enough to themselves, and that is precisely what makes people respond with respect, even if they don't intend to. They recognize the structure, the order, the discipline. They recognize the effort it takes to cultivate an integrated personality in a world that encourages fragmentation. People also understand, again often unconsciously, that someone who carries authentic authority has a far more developed moral landscape. You're not merely strong, you're responsible. And responsibility, in its highest form, is deeply admirable but also deeply intimidating, because it implies sacrifice discipline, the willingness to confront suffering voluntarily. Many people shy away from those requirements. So when they see someone who walks with the weight of responsibility properly balanced, they can't help but feel a mixture of respect, envy, unease, and curiosity. Silent authority is powerful precisely because it doesn't have to be projected. It doesn't rely on theatrics or intimidation. It arises from competence. Competence in how you think, how you act, how you speak, how you regulate yourself. When you've cultivated that level of internal order, you become someone whose presence settles the environment. People become more attentive. They choose their words more carefully. They look to you, consciously or not, for cues on how to conduct themselves, and perhaps most importantly, your presence challenges people without you needing to challenge them directly. It encourages them to straighten their posture, to think more clearly, to behave more maturely. Authority, when genuine, elevates the surrounding environment. It organizes chaos merely by existing in close proximity to it, and people sense all of this, even if they can't articulate it. That is why your aura carries silent authority, because you've done the internal work that most people avoid, because you've built yourself into someone capable of standing firm when others waver, because you've taken responsibility seriously enough that it has transformed not only your behavior, but the atmosphere that shifts when you walk into the room. Confidence, real confidence, is not the exaggerated swagger people often imitate, nor is it the loud insistence on one's worth that masks insecurity. It is something far deeper, something that emerges only after you've voluntarily confronted the parts of yourself that are fragmented, chaotic, or undeveloped. When someone radiates confidence without effort, it means they've undergone a long and often painful process of organizing themselves, integrating their weaknesses, and strengthening their capacity to act in the world. Effortless confidence is the natural consequence of competence. When you genuinely know that you can rely on yourself, you no longer need to parade your abilities or announce your value. You simply move through the world with a sense of internal order, and that order broadcasts itself in every small action. The way you walk, the way you speak, the way you listen, even the way you remain silent. People respond to it instinctively because it signals stability. It signals that you've established a hierarchy of priorities within yourself and that you're oriented towards something meaningful. You radiate confidence without trying because you're not acting. You're not performing a character or following a script designed to impress others. You've carved out a piece of order within your own soul, and that order becomes perceptible to anyone paying attention. Most individuals spend their lives in a state of uncertainty, pulled in multiple directions by impulsive desires or external pressures. When they encounter someone who has consolidated themselves, whose actions align with their values, and whose demeanor expresses coherence, they can feel it. It makes them more alert, more respectful, sometimes more defensive, because it highlights their own internal disarray. There's a physiological component to this as well. When someone has confronted fear repeatedly, When they've learned to regulate anxiety instead of being dominated by it, their nervous system broadcasts calm. Calmness, in itself, is a form of confidence. Not the fake kind that collapses under scrutiny, but the kind that communicates, "I can handle what comes." People sense this even if they don't consciously identify it. They see it in your posture, shoulders back, chin level, spine straight. They hear it in your speech, measured on force, not rushed by insecurity. They feel it in the way you hold eye contact, not aggressively, but steadily, with presence, and confidence radiates most strongly when a person is aligned with a purpose. When you aim at something meaningful, your life organizes itself around that aim. Each step you take becomes a conscious choice rather than a reaction to circumstances. This produces a clarity of movement that others notice immediately. They might not understand the details of your purpose, but they can tell you are guided by something. That guidance expresses itself as certainty, not arrogance. It's a certainty rooted in responsibility. Responsibility for your choices, your actions, your development, your direction. People also respond to the absence of self-deception. When you speak truthfully, when you don't betray your own principles, when you refuse to contort yourself for approval, your presence gains weight. There's an authenticity that can't be fabricated. This authenticity generates confidence because you're no longer carrying the psychological burden of pretending. Pretending weakens a person. Truth strengthens them. And when people encounter someone who is strengthened by truth, they feel the difference immediately. Effortless confidence is a kind of moral fortification. It means you've struggled with your limitations and come out stronger. It means you've learned to endure discomfort without collapsing into chaos. It means you've taken responsibility seriously enough that it has reorganized your character. And once your character is reorganized, your presence naturally follows. The radiance of confidence isn't something you put on. It's something that emerges from within when your internal structure is sound, coherent, and aligned with something higher than momentary desire. People freeze in your presence because, whether they articulate it or not, you embody something they've spent their whole lives avoiding, the reality of their own unrealized potential. You stand there as a kind of living contrast, a reminder of the difference between who they are now and who they could be if they stopped running from responsibility, chaos, and the necessity of personal transformation. And that's not an easy thing for most people to face. Human beings have an extraordinary capacity for self-deception. We build elaborate internal narratives that protect us from confronting the truth about our weaknesses, our laziness, our fears, and our failures. When someone comes along whose very presence exposes that deception, even subtly, the immediate response is paralysis. It's not that people consciously think, "This person intimidates me because I'm not living up to my potential." The psyche doesn't work that simply. Instead, their body reacts first. Their breathing shifts, their posture tightens, their speech becomes hesitant. It's a deeply rooted biological response to perceived hierarchy, not hierarchy in the oppressive or authoritarian sense, but hierarchy in the competence-based sense. When someone displays the marks of genuine growth, discipline, clarity, responsibility, courage, the people around them instinctively recognize it. They see someone who has moved up a level in internal organization, and that recognition forces them to notice the gap between themselves and that higher standard, and noticing that gap is painful. It's destabilizing. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It reveals that your excuses have been insufficient, your distractions ineffective, and your rationalizations flimsy. Many people would rather freeze than confront the truth that they are capable of far more than they currently embody. They fear what that realization would demand of them. It would require sacrifice. It would require discipline. It would require the abandonment of comfortable habits. It would require facing the parts of themselves they've exiled into the shadows. Your presence acts as a catalyst for that confrontation. It wakes something up inside them, an awareness that they have avoided for too long. That awakening produces anxiety, not because you are threatening, but because the truth is. When someone encounters a person who is actively becoming, who is moving upward psychologically, they come face to face with their own stagnation, and stagnation, when illuminated, becomes unbearable. The freeze is a protective mechanism. The psyche resists growth by resisting the person who symbolizes it. There's another layer to this as well. People often fear what they admire. Admiration is dangerous because it reveals what you value most deeply, and what you value often points directly at what you lack. When people encounter someone who embodies strength, authentic, disciplined, self-governed strength, they feel a kind of gravitational pull. They are drawn to it. But that pull is paired with fear, because pursuing the same path would mean dismantling everything weak or dishonest within themselves. So instead of moving forward, they hesitate. They stop. They freeze. Your presence generates this dual response: attraction toward what is admirable and terror toward what is required to attain it. You represent the future version of themselves they're afraid to build. You represent the responsibility they've postponed. You represent the courage they've talked about, but never acted upon. And the psyche recoils when confronted with unmet potential because it highlights a moral failing. Not in the sense of punishment, but in the sense that they've betrayed their own higher possibilities. People freeze because you embody a direction, a trajectory, a seriousness about life that exposes their lack of one. You remind them that life demands growth, and that stagnation is not neutral, it's decay. And when confronted with that reality, many people's initial response is not admiration, not curiosity, but paralysis. They're trying to process the uncomfortable truth that someone else's progress has illuminated the cost of their own avoidance. A catalyst is something that alters the environment simply by existing within it. It doesn't force, it doesn't coerce, it doesn't dominate through brute strength. It initiates transformation by revealing what is dormant, what is hidden, what is waiting to be developed. When your presence functions as a catalyst, it means that the psychological landscape around you changes the moment you enter. People become more aware of themselves, of their flaws, of their aspirations, of the divide between who they are and who they could be. You're not trying to provoke this. You're not walking around with the intention of unsettling anyone. But the structure of your character, the seriousness with which you approach your life, acts as a contrast that others cannot ignore. Human beings are incredibly sensitive to the conduct of others. We take cues constantly, subconsciously, from posture, tone, emotional regulation, clarity of speech, and consistency of behavior. When someone with internal order enters a space, it disrupts the prevailing equilibrium. If that equilibrium is weak, lazy, chaotic, or stagnant, then your presence exposes it. Not maliciously, but inevitably. People aren't just responding to you as an individual, they're responding to the version of themselves they glimpse in comparison. And that comparison often generates an internal crisis. It presents a question. Am I living in alignment with what I claim to value? That question alone can change the entire course of a person's life. Your energy pushes others to adjust because it highlights the truth that they too must become responsible for their own direction. Responsibility is the cornerstone of growth. Without it, life collapses into disorder. But responsibility is heavy, and most individuals avoid it until they are forced into confrontation by external pressure. You represent that pressure not through dominance, but through example. People see that you've taken ownership of your actions, that you've developed discipline, that you've refused to remain stagnant. And when they encounter that, the psychological mechanisms they use to avoid responsibility begin to fail. Their excuses feel weaker. Their distractions lose their power. Their narratives become harder to believe. This is why your presence polarizes. Some people rise when you enter the room. They become sharper, more attentive, more focused. They instinctively elevate their behavior because your existence reminds them of their potential. You activate something dormant within them. You give them a glimpse of a better version of themselves, and that vision energizes them. For others, however, the reaction is the opposite. They retreat. They become defensive. They treat you as a threat, not because you've harmed them, but because the truth you represent destabilizes the fragile identity they've constructed. Growth requires confronting chaos, and many people would rather cling to their comfortable suffering than voluntarily face the unknown. But the catalytic effect of your presence extends beyond individuals. It reshapes social dynamics. Groups change their tone. Conversations gain depth. Mediocrity becomes harder to justify. When someone stands firmly in their values, Others are compelled to reconsider their own. This creates a ripple effect. One person raises their standards, and suddenly the entire environment follows. Not because they are forced, but because they are inspired. Inspiration is a powerful force. It calls people toward the best within themselves. Yet inspiration also demands sacrifice, and some resist that call because they fear the cost. Being a catalyst is not about superiority. It's not about placing yourself above others. It's about embodying enough internal alignment that your mere existence disrupts stagnation. You remind people, consciously or unconsciously, that they cannot remain as they are without consequence. Life is movement. You're either moving upward toward greater integration or downward into fragmentation. When you walk into a room, people feel that truth. They sense that you have chosen movement, and that choice challenges them to make their own. Your energy compels a decision: to level up or to withdraw, to grow or to cling to limitation, to confront the truth or to avoid it. That is the power of being a catalyst. Your very presence forces others to encounter themselves, and in that encounter, transformation becomes possible.